Hello, today's video covers topic 7.4, which is population genetics. Before I begin, I want to cover a few vocabulary words. These include population, which is defined as a group of individuals of the same species that live in the same area and interbreed, producing fertile offspring. The other term I want to review is population genetics. Population genetics is the study of how the population changes genetically over time, and that's going to be the focus of today. So how the traits within that population change from generation after generation after generation. So what are the forces that drive evolution? Well, we've already talked about natural selection, and natural selection is defined as this differential reproductive success, such that because of pressures in the environment, certain individuals are selected for because they had advantageous characteristics, and certain individuals are selected against because they have characteristics that do not allow them to survive and reproduce offspring for future generations. The three concepts that we're going to look at today include mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow. Mutations are random processes that contribute to evolution. Mutations are random changes in our DNA that are sometimes passed on to our offspring. Now, this occurs if the mutations happen in our gametic cells, such as our sperm or eggs. And we'll talk about that in future units. Now, some of these mutations may be helpful, some may be harmful, and others are just neutral, that they have neither a benefit or detrimental to the organisms. However, only traits that increase reproductive success or fitness will continue to be passed on generation to generation. And this is described in the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide. You can see here that we have a population. Let's say that these are bacteria, and we have a mutational event. So it's a random change of the DNA. And what it does is it creates from our parental population 3 different variations: the dark, the medium, and the light color. Now, because of selective pressures in the population, some of these mutations, such as the dark mutation, are selected against. And so even though that mutation happened, those individuals are removed from the population, whereas the lighter colors seem to be advantageous and they produce more offspring in future generations. Now, interestingly, the light gray color there, it actually has another mutation. And that mutation is even more favorable. And as you can see, after generation after generation after generation, our population has evolved to be all white bacteria, because that is the advantageous characteristic in this particular environment. Our next concept is what we describe as a bottleneck event. Now, I just want to make sure that you understand that this is pronounced in a small population. So a large population, such as the human population, this really would not be quite as prevalent. But in a very small population, these small changes can influence the population genetics quite dramatically. So in a genetic bottleneck, you can see here in the example, I have a population of red and blue individuals. However, after the bottleneck event, something drastically caused the population to decrease. We see that in the future generations, by random chance, only the red individuals were able to survive. We've actually eliminated the blue individuals from future generations, and this is by random chance. So what causes bottlenecks in the natural population? Well, a bottleneck is defined, as I said, a sharp reduction in the size of the population, usually due to an environmental event such as a famine, an earthquake, flood, fire, disease, or even other human activities. And what this does is it drastically reduces the population. So maybe 90-95% of the population vanishes. And this is shown here in the cheetah population. So originally in the population of the cheetahs, for example, at one particular gene, there were 25 different alleles, so 25 different traits for that one particular gene. Now think of this as eye color. We have green eyes and blue eyes and brown eyes. So let's say that this is a particular trait in the cheetah population. Now, after habitat destruction in hunting, that large cheetah population drastically became reduced. And as a result, many of the alleles have now, or traits, have been lost from the population, such that only 4 of those alleles remain in the population. So bottlenecks dramatically reduce the ability of that cheetah population to adapt and survive to environmental changes if there's a shift in available resources. And that's why conservation is so important. The next concept is founder's effect. And once again, this influences the genetics of a small population. So in a founder's effect, you can see here that we have our original population of red beetles and green beetles. And by random chance, a group of beetles decide that they want to start a new population. By random chance, we randomly selected 4 red beetles. What you'll notice is that because this was random, we did not choose any green beetles. And in the new population, the green beetle trait has now been lost from the original population. So we see this shift in our genetic traits in future generations of this new population. This can lose genetic diversity. Another way that our population can change is through the migration or gene flow. And once again, this can drive evolution. So you can see this situation right here. We have 2 isolated populations, population A on the left and population B on the right. However, a beetle from population A randomly migrated and entered population B. This is a new genetic trait that has now been introduced to population B. Over generation after generation after generation, this trait may cause that population to genetically change. So this is once again another way that we can introduce new genetic variation into our population. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it all depends. A reduction in the genetic variation within a given population can actually increase the differences between populations of the same species. So if you look at my diagram here, we have a population of beetles. We have yellow beetles, black beetles, and red beetles. Now, by random chance, I selected 4 of the beetles from the original population and started population A. I chose randomly another 4 beetles and started population B. What you'll notice in population A, I chose 2 yellow ones and 2 black ones. In this situation, I have lost the red beetles from that population. Similarly, in population B, I've chosen 2 red beetles and 2 yellow beetles. In this founding population, I have lost the black beetles in the population. Now what you'll notice, if these 2 founding populations continue to breed and create generation after generation after generation, you can see in the descendants that these new populations are distinctively different from each other. In fact, they actually may create 2 separate species. Certain mutations in genetic variations may provide phenotypes on which natural selection acts. And the best example of this is antibiotic resistance. So on the left-hand side there, we have a population of bacteria. So these bacteria may be in your gut. And by random chance, some of these bacteria have a mutation that is resistant to the antibiotic. So imagine you're sick, you take an antibiotic, and what that does is the drug causes death of many of the bacteria in your gut. However, because there is variation in the population, a small collection of those bacteria that are naturally resistant to the drug survive, and that is represented by the yellow bacteria. So all the blue bacteria die because they are sensitive to the drug. Now, because of competition and because of the drug, all the blue bacteria have now been eliminated. But our drug-resistant yellow bacteria now no longer have to compete against the blue bacteria, and they reside in your gut. So that's how antibiotic resistance can occur. And that's how these random mutations can drive natural selection. So because those bacteria were naturally resistant to the drug, they have a selective advantage. Now let's just review what we talked about. Genetic drift happens to all populations, but its effect is going to be amplified in smaller populations. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we have a large population. We randomly choose a collection of the individuals. And what you'll notice is the new population looks very similar to the original large population. However, if we start with a small population and we choose to start a new population from that small population, by random chance, we can shift the genetics of that population such that we lose certain characteristics, such as the light blue and the pink characteristics in that population. So this can reduce the genetic variance in a population and reduce the ability to adapt to new selective pressures. So think about climate change or changes in the resources. This could actually cause that population to not be able to adapt to future changes, and this is detrimental to populations. So to finish off, I just want to look at the forces that drive evolution. We talked about mutation. These are random changes that cause new variants in the population. We talked about gene flow. Those are one population which enter a different population. So those are going to be new genetic changes within that population. Genetic drift is all about chance. So if you see chance, you can see in this example we have a collection of green beetles and red beetles, and by chance you accidentally stepped on all the green beetles, not because the green beetles had a selective advantage or disadvantage for this situation, but by random chance. And as a result of that random chance, only red beetles survive into the future generations. And then last but not least, we talked about selective pressure. So in this example right here, you can see that our beetles, our reptile, our chameleon there, he likes green beetles and he seems to eliminate the green beetles. So that is the selective pressure, allowing only the red beetles to survive the future generations. Now, last but not least, I just want to make sure that you remember natural selection is not a random situation or a random process. Even though we talked about randomness such as mutation or gene flow, genetic drift, bottleneck, or things like that, what ends up happening is that these changes, these random changes, actually lead to a non-random selection.